Okay, so I've done a video on opening data files in SPSS and Excel. I think eventually I'll do a few other software packages that I know, SAS and R and that sort of thing. But right now what I wanted to do was give you a video on how to enter data into SPSS, assuming that you've got data maybe in paper and pencil format, so you've got like a bunch of written surveys or paper and pencil surveys that people have filled out, and you need to get that data into a stats package of some kind. You could enter it in Excel, or you can enter it into SPSS. So I'm going to show you how to start from the ground up building a data set in SPSS. I'm just going to make up numbers out of my head as I go when I'm doing this, but what you would have is like a stack of papers with like the responses that people had filled out in your survey or what have you, and you would be starting your SPSS data file from scratch. So I've opened SPSS and I've got the data editor here, and you can see in the data editor you've got it defaults to this view, which is the data view, where variables are in columns and individual participants or subjects would be in rows. So all the responses that you get from one participant goes in one row, and all of the individual responses that you got from that participant would have their own column. Okay, and that's generally the way data is set up, or should be set up anyway. If you get data that's not set up that way, something's gone terribly wrong. Somebody didn't know what they were doing. So, okay, in SPSS it defaults to this data view, but it's not the only view. You've also got a variable view, and you can switch between them down here in the lower left corner of SPSS. You've got these tabs that will switch back and forth between data view and variable view, and it's in the variable view that you can sort of set up your data file to get it ready. So let's see. Let's suppose that we have a survey where we well, first of all, we want some kind of a participant identifier, so I can say here like participant ID, something like that. Something to keep in mind when you're writing variable names in SPSS. SPSS does not allow for any special characters except the underscore. So if you put an underscore, you're fine. If you try to put something like, hey, I'm really excited about participant ID, let me put an exclamation point here, you get an error. Variable name contains an illegal character. Yep, it sure does. Okay, and then let's say I had a survey version. I can label that variable which version of the survey they got, and then I can just label my questions, something like Q1, Q2, and so on. I'm probably going to stop right there. With Q3, you could, as many questions as you've got on your survey, you can label them. And then you can also, you could fill out variable names that told you, like Q1, how much did you, like, whatever. And SPSS used to have a highly restricted length of the variable names could be. I don't know what the restriction is now, but it's definitely not what it used to be. Now you can write like, 30 and 40 characters at least, and maybe more. I've never actually tried to figure out if there was a maximum anymore, because, it's always been more than enough for me. But you can also give it labels here. So a good way to label something if you have survey data or something like that would be with the actual question itself here. So, did you like taking this survey? How much time did you spend? Blah blah blah. Whatever it was, So you can label your different items. Think of another question. I'm just going to make all this stuff up as I go. So there you go. Some other things you can do, well, I'll show you other things you can do after I've entered some data, because it's usually convenient to do these other things like give value labels to your data and so on later on. So let's switch back to the data view and let's just enter some data. So now I've got blank data, and let's say I know I'm going to have 10 participants. I can just enter the participant ID here. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, let me show you this. Let's switch back to variable view and make participant ID. Let's switch its type. The default in SPSS is going to be numeric. Let's switch the type there to string, because maybe I'm using a code for the subject ID, and that code may have letters and numbers and who knows what else. So I'm not going to come up with any kind of complicated code right now. I'm just going to call it sub1, sub2, sub3. We'll just stop right there. Let's say I only had 4 subjects. You'll have hopefully more than 4 subjects in a real research project, but you never know. All right, survey version. I'm just going to go with version 1 and version 2. and then what did these participants say on these surveys. Let's say that we were using 1 to 7 Likert type scales. I just learned recently that it's pronounced Likert, not Likert. Likert scales. At least that's somebody claimed that it was pronounced Likert. It's named after a person, and however that person pronounced their name, I guess is how you pronounce the scale. I had always heard it pronounced Likert, but maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's Likert. Somebody who knows can comment. Anyway, let's say it was a 1 to 7 scale of agreement. 1 would mean strongly disagree. 7 would mean strongly agree, something like that. Let's just make up some numbers here. Now, you, of course, wouldn't be just making up numbers. That's called data fabrication. That's terrible, terrible. I'm doing it here, of course, only for an example, right? There we go. So we've got some numbers. You would be reading off of each of your participants' surveys. If you are doing this, if you're entering data by hand, there's a couple of things you need to do for quality control. One, have at least 2 different people enter the data separately, independently, and then compare their data entries to see if you have any errors. You can do that through correlation. You can do that through taking a difference. If there are no errors, you should get all zeros in the differences between variables. I'll show you how to do that at some point down the road, but you do want to do that for quality control. Also, if you've really got a lot of surveys that you need to enter by hand, it's really handy to actually work in pairs and have one person read out the numbers while the other person enters the data. That kind of helps things go a little bit faster in the data entry. And I don't know if it cuts down on errors or not, but it definitely helps things go faster. But when you're entering by hand, there's always the chance that errors are going to creep into your data, so you want to do that. All right, now variable view. I'm going to switch back to variable view and show you how you can then put in some other value labels that are good. So like study version 1, I'm going to enter some value labels here. Let me show you how I did that. So when you click in the values section here in the variable view, you get this little blue button here on the side. You just click on that little blue button and you get this dialog that will then allow you to enter. And it say like number 1, let's say this was the big survey ad, and version 2, let's say this was the little survey. I mean, who knows what big and little survey means. And now, if I switch back to data view, now that I've entered value labels there, if I switch back to the data view, I'm actually not seeing my value labels. And the reason for that is, by default, SPSS probably has that turned off. So I'm going to go up here to View in SPSS, and I'm going to say, turn on my value labels so I can see them. Thank you. And now you can see that I see big survey, little survey. I see the value labels that I entered in. That's actually handy to do after you've entered the numbers in, because it's just kind of a pain in the neck once you're in here. If I click in here, see it's kind of, you get this little drop down menu. You can enter numbers there, but it's just kind of a pain in the neck during data entry to have those value labels in there. All right, so now back to our original 4. And there you go. You've got a data set up. You're ready to rock and roll. Let's see, what else can I show you? Missing, some people like to define a missing value, like they'll make it 99 or 999, and that will denote a missing value. I'm going to strongly advise you not to do that. I have seen people do that, and then what happens is they forget to tell SPSS for every one of their variables that that's the missing value, and they've chosen some extreme number to be their missing value, but they've forgotten, when you have 100 variables or 500 variables, inevitably one of them you're going to forget to tell SPSS that that's the missing value, and then you're going to have that value in there, and SPSS is going to think it's a legit value. I've seen this at least 3 times in my career. 3 different people who thought they had this amazing finding, or they thought they had no finding at all, when in fact they did, and it was because of this missing value issue. So I'm going to urge you, if you have missing data, the best thing to do is just leave it blank, and that way SPSS can't screw it up for you. You can't make that mistake where 999, you think that that's the missing value, but you forgot to tell SPSS that. Maybe you told it that for this one, but you got 500 of these things, and on one of them you forgot to tell SPSS that 999 was the missing value, and now SPSS is going to think that's real, and it's going to just skew everything. It's going to make everything crazy. So if you have missing data, just leave it blank, and SPSS can't mess that up. It will either throw them out of the analysis or recognize that it's missing. SPSS doesn't have to be told that a blank is missing. SPSS knows that that's missing. So just leave it like that if it's missing. All right, let's just put another number. I don't even remember what number I started with in there, but it doesn't matter. What else do I need to tell you? The measure, once you define a string variable, it's going to be nominal. Here it's all unknown. You can define it if you want. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes it's not. Actually, for type of survey, I would probably just call that nominal. Scale, a Likert type scale, I would call scale. If you want to be really conservative in your statistics, if you want to be a real stickler for the rules, call it ordinal, right? A Likert type scale. Some statisticians would consider that only an ordinal scale, but most would not. Most would consider it to be a at least interval level scale. Let's see, we don't care about that roll. Never had to worry about that. So I think we're good to go now. There you go, entering data in SPSS. It'll probably take you a little bit longer if you've got real data, but those are the basics. Now you save it, give it a name, whatever you're going to save it as, and away you go.